We've been doing some really big work, and this is the last step to unpacking the standards. We have determined what students need to know and what they need to be able to do, but we have yet to talk about what they need to understand, that conceptual learning. And honestly, there's a reason for that. It's because it's difficult. This is one of the hardest parts of unpacking standards I run into with teachers. And so I try to get us all set up and in a way, in a format, in a kind of like a sequence that will make this part easier. So today I want to teach you that it's important when you're unpacking standards to understand the conceptual knowledge of the standard. That's where we ask ourselves questions like, how is this going to be applied? Why do students need to know this? What are some of the concepts or interrelationships that they need to understand, or procedures? And I want to give you an example of conceptual knowledge, and this will be an example of me in math. So if you know me, you know that I say all the time, I am not a math person. I know I shouldn't say that. I'm working on it, but it's a fact. So when I taught second grade, we used to teach students how to borrow and regroup when they were doing multi-digit subtraction problems. And honestly, I learned how to borrow and regroup using the algorithm, like borrow and carry, right? When I had to teach second grade, I had no understanding of the meaning, no conceptual knowledge of the concept. All I knew was, well, the number on the bottom, or the number on the bottom is bigger than the number on the top on the ones column. And so I'm just going to borrow and regroup from over here. So I'm just going to flip flop these numbers around. I had no idea that I was borrowing tens or hundreds or thousands. I had no idea of like a tens framework, that 10 tens make 100, and how the numbers grew. I did not have that conceptual knowledge. I did not have that understanding. Another thing that I think about is when I'm teaching students how to read and comprehend a text. They need to have, when I teach them how to be able to read and comprehend a text, they need to understand that they can use a variety of strategies depending on the text that they're navigating, or depending what they're coming upon when they get to different parts of the text. So they need to have a strong understanding of what the text is asking them to do and the thinking that they need to be able to do to navigate that text, to comprehend that text. So when I think about conceptual learning, those are some examples of what conceptual learning looks like in math or looks like in ELA. Let's take a minute and see, what does that understanding look like when it comes to driving and merging onto traffic. So I'm taking us back to our standard, our standard from earlier where we were merging onto the highway. And I'm going to show you just a little trick that I do. One of the things that I do is I go to, what do students need to be able to do? What are these implied learning targets that aren't explicitly stated up here? Well, students need to safely merge onto highways. The next question that I ask myself is, what do they need to understand? What do they need to understand when it comes to merging safely on the highways? How might they do that? Or what procedure is, when I think about myself merging on a highway, what do I understand here in my brain that allows me to do that, that keeps me safe? Well, one of the things that does that, one of the things that you need to understand is that you have to match the speed of the car you're driving or vehicle that you're driving with the speed of merging traffic, or the traffic you're merging on. You're merging on. In order to safely merge onto traffic, I also need to understand that I have mirrors on my car and that I can use mirrors and the angles they share, the angles, to safely merge onto the highway, right? Also, mirrors can help me determine like my lane selection. Let's look at another one. Safely merge. So students will be able to safely merge in congested traffic. Well, they need to understand their speed, right? They also need to understand to safely merge into congested areas. They need to understand how and procedure for that. I think when I think about that, I think that you have to understand how to adjust the distance between your car, the one in front of you, and those coming up upon you. As the driver. So do you see what I'm doing? I'm looking at each thing, each implicit learning target. And then I'm thinking, what goes on in my head for me to do that? That students need to understand. What are those relationships? What are those procedures they need to understand that we don't talk about, that we automatically do because we understand how to drive at a high level. We understand how to merge into traffic on a high level. So these things become automatic processes happening in our brains that allow us to do that well. Now, when I go back to that math example, when I think about the algorithm and borrowing and regrouping in my mind, I see now ones, groups of 10 ones, groups of 10 tens, the rods. So I used to see cubes and then rods and then hundreds, the hundreds, and then the cube for the thousands. So that's what's going on in my mind because I have a better understanding of the meaning, the concept of what it means to regroup. What you're going to do after you've done this is determine, do any of these understandings need to be implicit learning targets? What I can tell you is that going through this process increases your understanding of the standard. So you get to determine, do I want to move some of these down to implicit learning targets, or am I going to make sure that as I'm teaching these implicit learning targets, what students will be able to do, that I'm weaving in the learning of the understanding? I'm going to leave that up to you. So now what you're going to do is, first of all, I want to say congratulations. You're going to go back and finish what students need to understand. And then you'll write up whatever the rest of your implicit learning targets are. I just want to say congratulations. Hold it, let me get out of this. Congratulations. You have just unpacked a standard. Well done, and off you go.